This podcast is brought to you thanks to the generous support of Whistler Blackcomb, leaders in delivering adventure.
Love it. I think that's really important. And very rarely do people say, "Oh, well, you're incompetent for doing that." When you as a leader say, "Hey, I don't know, and let's talk about this," or do you know anything about this? Then it actually makes you stronger. People respect that when somebody asks questions. And then the other thing it does is you start talking about it. Maybe you realize that person really doesn't want to take a degree of risk that you were thinking was appropriate for that day.
Welcome to Delivering Adventure. This is the podcast that explores what it really takes to share adventure like a pro, with your friends, your family, and as a profession. My name is Chris Capio, and I'm coming to you from Whistler, British Columbia.
And I'm Jordy Shepard, recording from Canmore, Alberta. After a lifetime of working extensively in different parts of the adventure guiding industry, Chris and I have teamed up to launch this podcast. In each episode, you will hear top adventure guides, managers, marketers, and athletes share their best stories, advice, and trade secrets. The goal of this podcast is to share how you can take yourself and others farther from the mountains to the office and beyond.
At the heart of every adventure is a degree of risk-taking. Being able to communicate the level of risk that people can expect to be exposed to is an important component of delivering adventure to others recreationally and professionally. There is nothing worse than exposing someone to a situation that has an elevated level of risk or challenge and having them turn around and tell us that this is not what they expected. When this happens, the blame almost always lands on the leader. Another scenario that can cause damage to relationships and can derail a good adventure is when people feel like they are being forced or made to do something that they find difficult or dangerous. What can be worse is when a lack of communication around risk leads to physical injuries. And in some cases, inadequate risk communication can lead to legal actions such as lawsuits. On this last point, waivers of liability are often thought of as an example of risk communication in a professional setting. While a waiver is not the only way we communicate risk to our clients and students, it is an essential part of the risk communication process. We aren't going to get into waivers much in this episode, but we will say that if waivers are vetted by an experienced lawyer and are properly worded and delivered, they have a history of standing up in court in most North American jurisdictions. We say this because we hear a lot of misinformation about waivers not being legally binding, and this is often not true. If you are delivering adventure professionally, this is something that you should familiarize yourself with. This is a topic for another episode. More common tools for communicating risk that we are going to explore include informing people of the risks and involving them in the decision-making process. Doing this effectively can guide a leader's decision-making, help people to prepare for what is to come, and share a level of responsibility with participants should things not go as planned. When people give informed consent to taking elevated risks, they are less likely to blame the leader, which can help to protect relationships both socially and legally.
Helping us to examine how we can communicate risk more effectively is friend of the show, Will Gadd. Will is a world-class climbing, paragliding, and whitewater kayaking athlete. In addition to undertaking many adventures around the world as a professional athlete, Will also guides others professionally and is a certified ACMG Alpine guide. Some of Will's career highlights include establishing the hardest mixed ice climbing lines in the world, setting the world distance record for paragliding twice, 423 kilometers, that's 263 miles the second time, kayaking down dozens of first ascents across North America, winning the Canadian National Sport Climbing Championships 4 times, winning 3 gold medals at the X Games. Will has also been recognized as a mountain hero by the United Nations for his effort to raise awareness for environmental issues, including how climate change is affecting the mountain environment. As always, at the end of the episode, we will summarize some of Will's key points and we will have a few of our own add-ons.
All right. Welcome back, Will. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me back. We're getting to be regulars here. Enjoy
Yeah,
it.
that's right. Yeah, friend of the show status. I think there's a fridge magnet in the mail for you, or something like that. That's awesome. So in our last episode together, we talked about some of the key skills that we need if we want to be able to deliver adventure to ourselves and others effectively. How would you
Mhm.
rate the ability to effectively communicate risk? And this is something you touched on a little bit.
It's really hard to communicate risk in a meaningful way. And I spoke at a medical convention the other day, and we were talking about how they communicate risk for medical procedures. And the general consensus is it's really hard to actually communicate risk to people that aren't thinking about it in the same way all the time. And I think that's true in our world too. We can use statistics. We can say like 99% certain that this is all safe and good. Um, and we tend to think about those of us who want to be professionals. We want to use professional words, and we want to use neat sounding boxes of, our rate is this, and things like that. But I think for me at this point, I'm trying to use more emotion in my communication of risk, and relying oddly enough on something I wouldn't have done earlier, which is just reaching people in a way that resonates with them emotionally. And so I've written, various pieces for magazines. I have this document I send out to all my guests before I guide them or do a paragliding clinic or whatever that says, here's my experience with this. It's like the statistics are this, but that doesn't matter to the person that it goes bad for. I've been at this long enough that I have seen it go wrong. And so I try to communicate that in an emotional way that I hope resonates with people and they feel it. Because, whether you're getting a surgery and it has a 1 in 1,000 chance of going wrong, or you're going out for a day of backcountry, whatever, and it has a 1 in X thousand chance of going wrong, everybody thinks it's not going to happen to me. But if you can make it real and say, hey, I've been there, and we're going to try and stack the deck in our favor today and make good decisions and work together, because it really sucks when this goes bad. And I think in our industry, we often try to sell how great it is, these life-changing experiences, and you could do this, and it's going to be rad, and it's going to be so great. And we don't really mention that it's also, we're playing with a really heavy deck. And I think I don't think it's dishonesty. It's almost a little bit more of like a private delusion or a public delusion that we have in selling this stuff. Yeah, we need to be more honest and express that communication, often in emotional terms. Nobody ever reads the damn waiver, no matter how many times we tell them to. They just don't. And we get them to say that they did, and everybody plays the game. But if we can communicate that this actually really does involve poor outcomes some of the time, and use that in an emotional way, then yeah, that's kind of where I'm at it. I don't, statistics and waivers, they're one thing, but actually really communicating that in a way that resonates and people remember it. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know where you at. You do the same thing. I'd be curious.
Well, I think you're bang on in a lot of ways. It's that, to add on, it's that ability to relate as well. So if you read a waiver, there is a lot of information there about whatever the hazards are for that activity, but what does that mean? So if you've never done that activity before or rarely,
Yeah.
then like what does that mean? What are the chances? What's the worst case scenario? How likely is it for that to happen today? And then well, it's hard for me to even fathom that, like to picture that outcome. So if you were talking about, snowboarding, you're learning to snowboard. Well, today, first time, I have to tell you, you're gonna end up crashing quite a few times, probably 10, 20, 30 times, whatever, depending on how things go. Well, what does that feel like? If you're from Florida and you've never done that before, it's really
Yeah.
hard to imagine what falling on, hard pack snow is going to feel like, right? They may have this beautiful picture in their head of landing in a bunch of soft, fluffy snow, and this feels great. And you know what? Unfortunately, at the resort, it hasn't snowed for 2 weeks, and that's not what it's going to feel like. It's going to hurt. So, trying to communicate that to people, I think, sometimes is quite a challenge for us. So, what role, like you've touched on a few things, but what role does risk communication play in delivering adventure experiences to others, and what can happen if we don't do it well enough?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really important thing to do. You got to communicate the risk clearly. So one of the things I've done is work with. You can do that a few different ways. People often say, "Well, driving to the trailhead is the most dangerous part of my day." And you can actually, there's some pretty good numbers out there, and you can challenge that assumption because it's not. It's anywhere from sort of 4 to 90 times more dangerous than doing our activities is anywhere between 4 and like 90 or orders of magnitude more dangerous than driving. Driving is actually really safe in modern vehicles. So I think good risk management has to start with a realistic grasp of what the actual hazards are, and those need to be communicated in some way that has emotional resonancy to people. The surgeons I mentioned earlier, they basically have come down to informed consent doesn't really exist. We have a very hard time communicating that, but they have to list the things and at least make people aware of them, even though they probably still can't make a really great decision. They're hiring us to help with that decision, but we do need to actually list them and look them in the eye and have that be there, and then have a realistic appreciation of what the real hazards are in the games that we play. So yeah, and then again, unfortunately, we have to think, how is this going to look in a courtroom one day? And if you're like, hey, these are the hazards, and we discussed this, and we didn't just put them into the waiver, we actually had a discussion about it, then it's a lot. It goes back to decision making. You can say, hey, we did our best to make a good decision, and it did not, unfortunately, go well. The outcome was not what we wanted to do, but we talked about it. We really got into it, and here we are, unfortunately. So it's important, and it helps make people make decisions. We're not going to Disneyland when we go out there in the mountains, even hiking. It's like that is a larger than daily risk life. We don't want to scare people, but we do want them to understand that it matters, and our decisions have real consequences. So we have to communicate that in a way that resonates with people, I think.
No, for sure. I mean, you hit on a few different things. I mean, first of all, I find that when you involve people in that decision-making process by sharing those risks and trying to make them as informed as possible, then they have a stake in what's going to happen. And so if you're
Yeah.
upfront and you're telling them, listen, this is what can happen, this is what I don't know, how do you feel about this? If something happens, then it goes back to your point of, well, you did tell me. And so, you know what, I have to own a little bit of that. One of the things that I mean, obviously we certainly worry about something catastrophic happening, and certainly somebody worrying about somebody being in a position where they would want to sue you and that sort of thing. But more common, I think, is the situation where we have somebody in a situation where they turn around and say, this was harder than I thought, or scarier than I thought, or was riskier than I thought. And I think that's one of the key things that we want to try to avoid as outdoor leaders. Do you have an example of a situation where you were leading where risk communication played a significant role, like either in a positive or a negative way?
I'll tell one about my kids, because I think that that will work well. We were out backpacking, and I said, I think I know where the trail goes, but I'm not really sure. I've never been here before, and I think it's over there, and we're gonna have to like figure it out. And then we're beating around, we're trying to find this trail, and eventually we did find some sort of trail, but we're going across this hillside, and it kind of sucked. And I'm thinking in my head, oh man, I've blown it, with my kids. We're out here in this rocky junk heap of, yeah, it's just a disaster. And I turned around and they looked remarkably happy. And I was thinking, what's going on? They get into the snacks without me knowing what's happening here. And they said, well, it's about like you said it might be. And we were good. Whereas if I'd said, yeah, the trail's over here and we're good. So over and over again, if you communicate, and that's a hazard where off trail things are messier, but it's that communication about what might happen that does make a difference over and over and over again. And if I'm ice guiding and I say, hey, I'm willing to go out today, the high's minus 25, but we're only going to go 10 minutes from the car. And if you get cold feet, we got to go back to the car like right away or you're going to freeze them. And then that afternoon, their feet are frozen. And I've asked them 6 times if their feet are okay. And we've had a plan to deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with that than if I hadn't done that work beforehand. And so those are two, that communication of hazards both leads to more fun because they're like, oh yeah, our communication of risks and knowledge leads to more fun because people are more comfortable. It's like my kids call that the sucky bits. But my guests and I laugh about it too. It's like, we're going to have the sucky bit coming up here. It's going to suck. And that's part of the day. This is what we do out here. And then I've had other situations.
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Yeah. We're doing
and you'd
cool
have tons of hordes of crowds with you, right? So there's a reason why you're out there without a whole ton of people with you.
Yeah, and often those sucky bits, the days that are most memorable with either guests or kids or partners, were like, oh man, that really sucked. We all bashed for like 3 kilometers, but we got out there and then we got to that lake and it was so cool. But again, it's a perceptual thing. If you kind of warn people what's coming, then they do better. And they're less afraid. They're like, wow, this isn't totally out of control. He said it's going to suck. It sucks. We're good here. Whereas if you're like, this sucks and he doesn't know what he's doing, then they might be questioning your leadership with some justification at that point.
Another tool we can use is sharing what we use as tools in terms of our community, like establishing what the risk is and the uncertainty that we are dealing with in that given day situation. And so we do have a thing called strategic mindset that we will often use in lots of the industries in the guiding world and instruction world. And so why don't we communicate that with the guests? That just sets a stage because we know we've talked about, if we're with a group or if I'm solo as an independent guide, I still go through that process in my morning and after evening meetings. And so why don't we communicate that with our clients saying, look, we're in assessment mode here. Like we don't know a lot about whatever it is, the snowpack or the ice conditions or, the alpine conditions or, I'm in a place where I don't really know the weather patterns very well because I'm new. You hired me to be with you in Italy and I don't know the weather patterns here. I don't even know where the weather comes from. Right. So I'm in full on assessment mode here. And, maybe if you've been here, maybe you could help because you can help fill in some of those knowledge gaps that I have even as a client and involve them in it.
Love it. I think that's really important. And very rarely do people say, well, you're incompetent for doing that. When you as a leader say, hey, I don't know, and let's talk about this or do you know anything about this? Then it actually makes you stronger. People respect that when somebody asks questions. And then the other thing it does is you start talking about it. Maybe you realize that person really doesn't want to take a degree of risk that you were thinking was appropriate for that day. Or they're keen for way more risk and you're keeping them on the blue runs or on the green runs at the base of the mountain when they could actually handle quite a lot more and they'd be fired up on it. But if you don't engage in that conversation, like there's the warnings and stuff, but then it's a conversation that you go through, I think, like your example at Italy, it's like, it's a conversation and that starts when you start sharing information and talking. Like a lot of professionals have resisted this idea of opening the Camino, so to speak, and show the guts of what's going on. We don't take that analogy too far, but I think the more we do that, the more it shows we have justified confidence and competence, and we're thinking about things, and it just leads to better decisions. So I'm all for it. I love it.
And then we can move forward with that and be actually review at the end of the trip, the day, the particular decision that we're talking about. Maybe it's like we just have to, I'm not very. I'm in assessment mode here and I'm just learning the terrain to get up to that part of the route. And then I'm good. And you're clear with that. And then have that review period. It can be very brief even, but saying, how did you feel that went, to your guests and clients? And they're like, that was pretty rocky. Yep. That you barely made it through there, but and then you know what their perspective was on it too, and you're actually getting that feedback rather than just saying, well, it worked and I communicated the risk and it all worked and we dodged the bullet or whatever and it's fine. No, let's have just a little bit of a review about that after the fact, and that's where we learn.
Yeah. we were driving out of the Ghost. I was ice guiding a few days ago. We're driving out of the Ghost, and I'm asking my client, great guy. It's like, how'd it go? He brought up the fact that I didn't really know where I was going, and I was like, you're right. There's been a fire since I was there last time, and I was totally making it up. And he was like, he brought up the point that maybe I should have talked to him about that. I was like, you're right. And he's like, okay, we're good. But if I'd been like, well, it worked out, we're fine. What are you asking me questions for? It would have done two things. He wouldn't have brought it up in the future because I wouldn't listen to him. And also, I wouldn't have learned anything from it. I should have been asking more questions and informed him more about that. And it didn't matter in the scheme of things, but to me, it was kind of a hole in the day. That was my learning that I scroll down at night. It's like, yeah, I didn't do a good job on that one. I got to do a better job on that one. But if you got to have that discussion that you're talking about to know that.
I was driving back with some clients after ski guiding last winter in the Rockies here, ski tour guiding. And I knew that it was, and I warned them, I was totally transparent. There's going to be some tight trees that we're going up through, which are not going to feel too tight as you're going up. But as we come back down, this is our first time backcountry ski and splitboarding. And so they're ski hill people. And they'd hired me for this backcountry experience as an intro day. And so I said, but as we come out, and then we're going to have a beautiful day up in more in the Alpine, it's going to feel open. And I think we should have some reasonable snow conditions. And then we have to come back down through the tight trees to get to the car. That's just reality. And so as we're coming back down, well, as we're driving back, I say, how did it go for you? Because I heard you talking, two of the three of you talking as we were coming down through the tight trees, saying, this is the worst day of my life. What one guy said. This is horrible. They're just having trouble with it, right? And I know they're safe and we're taking our time, but they're just not very familiar with these tight trees, right, in the snow. And I said, I just wanted to confirm, like, was this actually the worst day of your life? And they're like, oh no, they're laughing about it. And they're like, no,
right.
I just said that at the time. Right. But it's nice to have that confirmation that I was not part of the worst day of their life. They were just, feeling a little bit rowdy at that point and not very confident.
And that's going to be the story of the bar. Jordy took us through the tight trees, and they're going to call you up in a year from now and be like, we're ready for our AST1 or whatever.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, and you warned them about it. You're like, hey, this is going to be the sucky bit on the way down. And they got there, and it was the sucky bit. And, maybe they had some fun with it by calling it. But I think that process is really, really important, and being open about it. That's not all going to be happy. It's like, we're going to have to deal with some things here. And I love it.
Well, you raise a great point about that unknown factor. And one of the factors that we don't know when we're leading others is how they will respond. Yeah. We don't know when we put them in that difficult situation, how resilient they're going to be, how much energy they might have, how they're going to react. And you can end up being surprised. I had a lady, one of my ski clients said to me one day, she says, I know you'll never take me on a run that I can't do. And I said, actually, I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. I said, you could surprise me, right?
Yeah.
I've been doing this for a long time. I'm pretty sure I can gauge what you can do, but you might surprise me. It could be more difficult than I anticipated. The conditions could be different. I could just make a mistake. Like this could happen, right? I know two colleagues who have ski instructors who have taken people down double black runs on Blackcomb. Well, actually, they didn't take them. They got them to the top. One went partway down and had to hike back out, which was on the couloir on Blackcomb. So that would have been pretty tough. And another one had to hike up about, probably almost half a kilometer and had to climb probably 200 and some odd meters back because they got there and the person that they were with just couldn't do it. And in both circumstances, I'm sure that if you looked at it, they just ended up in a situation where the person surprised them. And they were probably in a situation where they were pushed to the limits. And that's often what we do, ski instructors, snowboard instructors, mountain bike instructors, when you're teaching these technical sports that have a lot of risk, you're trying to put people in positions where they wouldn't go necessarily on their own so that they can have that experience. And then sometimes it just doesn't work out, and you end up having to do a lot of lot of reputation repair and trying to massage it so that the experience ends up being seen as a positive instead of a negative.
But that's where the other professionals come in that are in the ski hill environment, which are the ski patrol. And they will, you call them, right, and say, you know what, this is not going well with my guest here. They're stuck, or they're injured, or they're scared. And then they have all these tools. They have snowmobiles for rides, and they have rope rescue systems in steep terrain and all that kind of stuff, right, that's available to them. And so that's what they're paying for, is to have that coverage one way or another, if they actually do need assistance and it's beyond your capability as their instructor or guide.
You know, a correlation to this that I like that, and I wish I could call the ski patrol a lot when I'm out in the mountains. I would have called them regularly, personally or professionally. I like call a friend. You know, I got to start working at ski areas. I love this. One thing that's interesting that relates to this, and I think as professionals and as both as outdoor industry leaders and individuals who do this stuff on our own, figuring out where people's limits are is really important. And that continuing conversation helps. When they shut up, then you know that there's an issue. If they're like the world's most verbal person and they're talking, a mile a minute, and all of a sudden they're not saying anything, then you need to listen to those clues. But even going deeper than that, one of the ideas that I'm working with a lot right now is you can either find your limits in negative ways. So the idea of like know your limits as a leader, or know your limits as a skier or a climber or whatever. This is like a lot of people say, I know my limits and I stay within them. And you ask them, how do you know that? And most people don't have a clue. They have no idea. And so a lot of what I do with people is try to find their limits in whatever things that I'm, but in a safe way. And the terminology that I use for this is you can either have negative limit setting, which usually results in a call to the ski patrol or to Geordie to show up with SAR, right? You don't actually know what your limits are and you find them in a negative way. Or you can, I very deliberately search for limits in a positive way, both with the people in my care, and they're in my care when I'm doing what I'm doing, or on my own. So rather than taking them down a line at Whistler, it's like, well, can they actually handle a bike in the air? And what does that look like in this relatively benign environment? And I don't really believe people a whole lot at this point. It's like, I want to actually see them execute these things and then find out what those limits are. Everybody who comes to me for ice climbing guiding says that they're, I trust the woman who says, I've never ice climbed before and I'm from Atlanta. I'm like, we got a good baseline here. I know where to go with this person. But the person who says, yeah, I lead grade 5 and we want to go do X big route, I take them usually to the same place, which is a small crag, and I figure out what they can actually do and what their limits are in a positive way. And that's become a much more conscious process. Is like, I want positive limit seeking and testing rather than negative limit seeking and testing, because that leads to, in Geordie's words, drama. And I don't like drama. I want to figure those things out beforehand. And so, yeah, whatever you're doing to figure out what those limits are. And you can use it in terrain too, a lot. Like, can you cut a small slope that's the same aspect and see what happens before you commit to something huge? You find out the limits of the situation in a positive way, whatever they are. So I'm consciously using that as a tool a lot more. I don't know if that resonates to you or makes sense, but that's one that's working for me.
Well, so much of it is perception based too, right? And so we have our perception, which is quite experienced generally, right? As guides, instructors, teachers. And then we have people who have a variety of, experiences and perceptions. And so it's trying to figure out what is actually perceived risk for them, where they're feeling like they're getting pushed, and what is actual real risk for them. And when they get to the real risk point, we have not done our job. And so if we can walk with somebody on a glacier that's snow covered and they can't see the crevasses, and we feel confident, we have ropes on and we have ability to rescue and we're probing and we know where the zones of compression are and tension, and we've been up there a lot. To us, it's not very risky. To them, they're walking on snow that could fall away at any second under their feet. And so that is pushing them possibly to, right to their limit. And we know it's completely safe for them to be there. If even the worst thing happens, they're still going to be fine.
We hope.
And yeah, and that's which is, yeah, they put a foot into a crevasse or even fall into the crevasse. We feel pretty confident that we've got this. But they are walking, and I remember back when I was first starting to do this stuff, ski touring on glaciers and alpine climbing and walking across glaciers. I didn't really know a lot. And I had this fear, and we've talked about fear, of falling into the glacier, right? And I was with people who were more experienced, and they didn't even have a thought that it was a problem falling into a crevasse. And so now I fast forward to having all this experience and actually pulling people out of crevasses, unfortunately, sometimes not alive and sometimes alive, which is great. But I have that perspective, and I'm like, yeah, this is benign terrain. But the perception of a lot of my clients would be that this is pretty badass terrain, and there's a lot of unknowns under my feet. And so you're delivering that adventure through there's a big gap between the perceived and the real risk. And that's what you're talking about there, Will, is you're pushing them, and they're going to be fine with it, and they'll do great with it, and they're totally safe. But what they don't know is that you are choosing terrain and objectives that are quite reasonable for them, and that you're not going to have to call out for SAR.
Well, and talking about that fear, like I would call that sort of stage 1 fear. That's the monster under the bed fear, that you're going to fall into the crevasse everywhere on the glacier. And personally, I actually tend to wear a rope a lot more on glaciers than I used to, because there are some holes out there that sneak up on me. I've had that happen. I'm much more of a fan of a rope than what I was like, this is bullshit. We're in the middle of a valley. It's covered. We're good, charge. And now I'm like, I've found holes in weird places. So that fear is maybe a little more justified than what I thought. But I would call that stage 1 fear, where it isn't actually that hazardous. It's like, that's the monster under the bed stage. Like, you think it's there underneath the snow or whatever. And so that's kind of the stage 1. And I actually really love that when people say, well, how do you know we're not going to just fall into the hole here? And I'm like, I don't know absolutely, but let's look at that and talk about it and bring people forward. And why I'm not super concerned about, while we're standing on this avalanche debris in the middle of the glacier or to the side of the glacier, I'm not super concerned. We're not going to take the rope off and go run around playing football just yet, but we're pretty good here, and here's why. And then that fear goes into, like, they start to move away from just fear, and then they can think and focus and engage. And so helping people with that fear, like, I really like that. And I'm sure you do that. I know you do. You get out there, you're like, all right, here's what's going on.
Yeah, and being a good coach and helpful coach with their perceived, it's not real, it's not actually a risky situation, but it's perceived for them, and for them it's real.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about the kid who's worried about the monster under the bed. I just saw a cartoon, it was great, and mom is reassuring the kid that's in the bed, like, yeah, don't worry about it, right? And the little kid is saying, well, can I come sleep in your bed? And then the mother in the cartoon says, well, I don't want you to come into my bed because the monster might follow you into my bedroom.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't want to be that kind of like, they're already on edge, and you don't want to be there's some really bad stuff here. And, so you don't want to, if it's safe for them, you don't want to ramp them up at all to them thinking that the worst is upon them, or could possibly be. So you got to be reassuring. And like you said, do that through, like, if you're on a glacier, let's use that, and there's snow there, and you pull out as a professional a probe, and you probe, and you go down 2 meters and you hit hard ice there. It's like, yeah, that we can actually check this out, right? It's not just unknowns that are beneath us. And we'll check periodically as we go, and we'll watch for these areas where we feel that the snowpack is more thin or weaker. And we're here in the morning, right, when it's more solid on a spring day, and not when it's weak in the afternoon. And you can give them all these things, and maybe it's just a few to think about that really reassures them, but they still know that there's crevasses there.
Yeah.
And that's where the adventure is.
Yes. And I think what you just said is really important, is you engage with them, and you engage with that fear. If you're just like, this is fine, I've been doing this for 30 years, we're good, that does very little. But if you're like, all right, here's what's here's what's, first of all, that's a really legit fear. And I had it at one time too. And we're going to keep the rope on because I could be wrong here. But here's some of the tools that I'm using. And again, it brings them into the process. And then they look at that, they look under the bed, and that fear becomes, it gets lowered to a more reasonable point where they're still concerned about crevasses, because there are crevasses out there. And we don't want to say it's totally safe, because it's not. But we can say that in this situation, one of the analogies I'll use is, I would happily be here with my kids, but we would talk about it and say, what are the real hazards here, and what are the perceived ones, and how are we going to work with that? But again, it's that conversation and communication, and it's not just laying out the statistics of, nobody's ever fallen into a hole in this glacier. Like, well, there was that one guy, but it's like, you got to make it like a believable thing to people, and it's that discussion and conversation with people. So love it. Yeah.
Well, and the other tool you talked about there, Will, is basically progression, right? And Chris, you've talked about that too, where you're building people up to, because maybe you have no idea what they're capable of, what their experience is. And so you're moving through this progression with them. And maybe not that day, or maybe that day, you actually get them to the point where you realize they're terrified of crevasses. And you actually are lowering them into a crevasse, and they're climbing out of it. And they have tackled that fear. And by the end of the day, or a week, or a trip, or a course, or whatever, they're feeling comfortable with these things that were this big bad unknown for them. And that's amazing to bring people to that level when it's appropriate. And that's done through progression. And that's us as reading people. Where are they at right now? And where do they want to be? And where do I think I can take them? And let's do it. And it's that positive side of things. The spin on it is I can, as long as I understand you and your situation, I can take you places you never thought you possibly could.
And then defining the safety in that and the risk in that, and it's this is what makes outdoor education so interesting. I've literally been involved in it one way or the other now for most of my life. As that incident I mentioned in the last show where I lost a kid at a mountain because he was annoying me, and I was young. That's the way. Well, we found the kid. It was all good. But that self-knowledge and looking back on it, this is what's cool about being the educator in this space, and whatever you're doing, is you learn and you get better at it, or hopefully you get better at it, and you get better at reading yourself and other people. I think it's fascinating.
So, Will, you touched on quite a few things. Understanding fear, understanding people's limits, and trying to assess that, and obviously communicating what the dangers and hazards are, and the potential of something going on. If you were to quantify all of this into a process, like starting from the start of your experience when you're guiding and instructing people to the end, what does it look like as far as that risk communication goes? Like what kind of process do you use? What kind of information do you share? What kind of language do you use? How much information do you usually share with people? And sort of how does your timing work with when you're going to bring this stuff in and talk with them?
It depends a little bit on what sport or activity I'm involved with. But I think when I was younger, I sent them a lot of information about whatever we were doing. And now I try not to do any of that until I talk to them. Like I want to know more about them first. Like that's the first stage in even doing anything. Before I can tell them what the risks of something are, I have to know what actually makes sense for them. And understand them and what we might do together and why. People always send me an email for, say, guiding. It's like, I want to do these things and I have these missions and objectives. And I'm like, great. So what does that look like? What have you done? And that's the first stage in making a good decision, is to understand the person you're dealing with to some extent. And not just what they say, but how they say it. And you can figure out pretty quickly how their brains actually are working and what their knowledge is. And so rather than just starting it out, it's like figure out the person, and then that kind of determines whatever. That's the independent variable. Like what we do is dependent on that person, not the other way around. And again, it goes back to the idea of guiding people, not objectives. Like I guide people. I take people out in the mountains, whether it's paragliding, kayaking, whatever. I take people out, and not not just for objectives. So that's the first step, is to understand that person. And then there's the information gathering. It's like, okay, I think this person can do this, and I'm going to go and take them out in a benign environment and figure out what's actually makes sense, what their knowledge is, whether they can actually even assess risk in any way in these environments. And then I try to, and then then it gets a little more organized. A lot of that's pretty soft skills, asking questions, getting things back, and then it becomes more organized. If I'm, maybe I've got a workflow where if I'm going ice guiding, it's like, all right, I actually have a pretty structured thing where what's the avalanche hazard and why, and am I aware of it in that area? Have I been in there? And I break it down more and more. But I guess there's one other component in that that's changed. I also send everybody that I guide or take into the mountains an article I wrote that lays out, hey, in an emotional way, searching for that emotional resonance with people that, I think I'm all right at this. I've done a lot of it, and I've got a pretty good track record, but I have had it go wrong. And I really want people to buy into that and not see me as like the expert. I want them to see me as somebody with a lot of knowledge. We're going to go out there together. So it's interesting you ask that question, because I think when I was younger, I was much more concerned with like A, B, C, D. I'm going to put this in my little book and I'm going to write it down, and this is what it's going to be. And now before I start doing that, that's the part that really is important in a lot of ways, to figure it out, figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and what our kind of philosophy of working together is. So I don't know if that answers your question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's different than it used to be. I used to be like, all right, here's the waiver, we're going. And now it's like, hang on, like, what do you want? How does it work? And then we'll, is a waiver even appropriate for this person? Maybe they should actually not do this. Like, I have turned people down that I just don't think are a good fit. And then it gets into, then it does get much more structured at that point. Maybe that's where the point where your question was at. But it's like, what knowledge do I have? What knowledge don't I have? What do I need to get? What's appropriate for this person? And this might sound incredibly sexist or something, but I'm going to treat the risk assessment for a male or female person with two young kids very differently than a 22-year-old guy who is going to go light the world on fire with or without me. That's a very different set of risk assessments in my view. But again, it comes down to knowing them before I can do a good job about planning the day for both of us.
So let's go into that a little further here. How does communicating risk to children differ from adults, or does it?
The basic assumption is that children can't, that's why they're kids. They can't actually get to the informed consent that a surgeon or we as guides would use. It's our job to keep them safe. And I actually had a situation yesterday where I was guiding, and one of the people on the trip didn't show up, and the other person brought their 12-year-old daughter. This kid can't make decisions, and their parent that is with them may or may not be able to make good decisions for that kid that I'm about to take out there. So I'm thinking about it. I'm like, we're 15 or 20 minutes from the car. This is an okay place. I'd be all right with my kids there. This is reasonable, but I'm going to have to spend more of my brain power during the day monitoring this kid. They're small. They're going to get colder quicker. They might not want to speak up because their feet are cold, and I can't let their feet freeze. Change things dramatically. And so I tend to want to work with kids or people with very low knowledge and very low experience in much more controlled and much more known environments. There's not going to be a lot of, like, as you were talking about earlier, Jordy, with those, there's not going to be a lot of tight trees. We're not going there. Like, I don't know what they're going to do. It's like, yeah, that bar has to be very, very low to keep going. So I don't know how you guys do it, but that's it. My job is to give them an experience, but I want no drama in that situation, and I'm going to set the bar there.
Yeah, I feel for me with kids involved, that the risk tolerance and chance of something happened, it really, so you fast forward, we've talked about things like court, right? You fast forward to court happening, and you're dealing with adults versus children being involved. Yeah. And it's going to be exponentially worse for you as the guide instructor when there's children involved. Everything from how you feel is it maybe it wouldn't be too much different with an adult gets hurt or a child gets hurt, you're just going to feel badly that it happened. But how it's going to play out, and how everything from the media and how their parents are going to react to that being a problem, and that you led them to, all of that is going to be horrendous. And so you really, you're not saying that it won't happen at all. The kid could, maybe get a little bit injured, twist an ankle with wearing a crampon or something for the first time, or break an ankle. But, you just can't have kids getting seriously hurt and expect there to be society to protect you and think that that's okay. It's just not cool. And then you step into what we call custodial groups.
Yeah.
So minors, youth that are not in the care of their parents. That's a whole nother game, right? It changes things significantly, because now the parents are not there to actively, parent their children and be part of the decision making. And that's a whole nother scene, like taking out school groups or, scout groups and that kind of stuff. It's you really need to be in pretty benign terrain, but still giving a good experience.
It's tricky too, because I don't think there's much recognition or tolerance, especially in our North American culture, with poor outcomes as being acceptable. And I've really seen this in a lot of areas lately, from all kinds of different things. But there's this idea that we're in control of our destinies in an absolute way. And so if something bad happens, it must have been because of these horrible decisions that were made by the people involved. And sometimes there is great negligence, and this does happen. Let's not pretend it doesn't. It does. But most of the time, it's good people working with the best of intentions. And they're not, whether it's a recreational or professional incident, they're not idiots. They went out the door that morning with the idea they're going to have a great day. And things didn't go their way, but there's no tolerance for that, or very little tolerance for that. So you find yourself in court going, so in hindsight, was that a good move or not? And it's been a tricky one. I think that decision-making process that we started this conversation with a little while ago, and the documentation and the discussion and the recognition is, I think it's very, very important.
So do you have any other advice or examples you want to share with the listeners on how they can become better at communicating risks when they're in this leadership role?
So many, that's just such a huge topic. I think the first thing is to move away from statistics, or if there are statistics, have the real statistics. I've heard this even from guides. It's like, most dangerous part of our day is driving to the trailhead. Well, no, it's not. It's like, if you have that information, you can dispel that. And then also making it emotional and being like, this is what we're going to do here is stack the deck in our favor to have good outcomes. And we're going to do that in the following ways together. And reduce your expert halo, do all these things, and just involve people emotionally, look them in the eye and be like, we're going to do something really cool today. And here's how we're going to go about doing it safely. These are some of the issues that I can see happening. I don't think they're going to happen, but these are actually real issues. Like, people have died on this glacier that we're on. And, I think you might be a little bit more on the, like, for me, I say things like that, and I'm like, I just think that's how it works. And that's the environment we're going into. And I want to bring you back, and I want to come back. And you say that with some emotion and some intensity, and people are all of a sudden like, wow, this guy's really thinking about things. And then that leads to better outcomes, I think, because they trust you, but they also know some of your limitations and want to be engaged. And that conversation is important. So, I think make it emotional, make it real, make it personal, and not just numbers and not just the waiver, and then engage people throughout the day. I've had several events where things did not go my way with either a paragliding event or a kayaking event or an alpine climbing event. But before that, I've been like, hey, I think this is reasonable. Here's the problems that we may face. I'm up for going in here and doing this, but this is a real hazard. What do you guys think? And when that real hazard materialized and I had some injuries, they were like, well, you talked to us about this. And it made that outcome a lot more palatable. Whereas if I just said, we're good, conditions are good, follow me, I don't think it would have worked out as well. Yeah. And then let's not forget that what we do is really cool. Sorry, but what we do is really cool. We get to take people amazing places and give them experiences of a lifetime. That's a big part of it too. So just let's not freak them out, but let's be realistic and keep the fire there for people, because that's what's cool.
Excellent. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Will, again. And you don't need to start a podcast because we'll just make you a regular on the show.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with you. You obviously think deeply about it, whether it's, how to give people better experiences at Whistler and give them the best possible outcomes, or ski touring journey. And I've enjoyed learning from you. You've been one of my mentors, and I've learned a lot from you. And I think about your words regularly out there in the mountains. So yeah, it's great.
All right. Thanks for this, Will. If you would like to learn more about Will's work as a United Nations mountain hero, join him on a guided trip, hire him to be your instructor, or have him speak at your event, you can reach him through his website, willgadd.com. We will post this link as well as links to his TEDx talk and a few other videos in the show notes. Well, Jordy, what came to you as you listened to Will?
Chris, Will's interview was excellent, as always, and it's great to have him back on the show. He spurred a number of thoughts about communicating risk. So one thing that came up was the role of risk communication. We need to inform everyone of what to expect so that people know what can happen, how likely it is, and how risks will be managed, and how they can provide the leader with informed consent. So that brings us to getting informed consent. So getting informed consent involves communicating the risks that will be faced in a way that people can understand and process accurately. Only when people have an understanding of what can happen to them can they give informed consent to undertake that activity. This is a really important concept in outdoor activities. The challenge with getting informed consent is that in some circumstances, it can be difficult and even impossible to inform people effectively. For example, in most situations, children cannot give you informed consent. Another example is when people have impairments such as head injuries, cognitive disabilities, or they've been drinking. Their ability to give informed consent also goes down. Another example is when people don't speak the same language and may not understand what you or a waiver are trying to tell them. The other challenge can be when people have no experience with a situation at all and cannot really form an informed understanding of what the consequences or the probability of encountering a negative outcome would look like. When people cannot give informed consent, a leader is wise to reduce the level of risk they are exposing people to.
Great points, Jordy. I'll add a few more. When it comes to communicating risk, we want to do it at the start, the end, and during our activity. Before undertaking an activity, it's a good idea to outline what the expected hazards are, the possible consequences, and the probability of experiencing those consequences. It's also a good idea to use this discussion to highlight how you are going to be managing those risks and what your emergency plan might look like. During an activity, you should be informing people anytime you are going to be taking on an increased level of risk or you're about to do something that is completely new to them. Examples of these include a ski instructor who's going to expose their students to an area with more skier traffic, a climbing guide who is about to enter a different kind of terrain that their clients have never encountered before, or a mountain biking instructor who is about to descend a more technical trail. It's also a good idea to check in with people during the day to see if their risk tolerance has changed. This can happen for a variety of reasons. In some cases, people may feel more open to taking increased risk because their skills or confidence has increased. On the other hand, people may feel like they want to take on less risk because the conditions or weather has changed. They have become fatigued and have less energy, or they've discovered that they weren't as good at the activity as they thought they were. A close call, like a fall or crash, can also change someone's perception of how much risk they are willing to expose themselves to. At the end of an activity, it's always good practice to debrief the day by asking how people felt and addressing any concerns that the leader may have had about how things went. The memories that we have are the stories that we tell ourselves and others. Addressing any issues around taking on too much risk or being exposed to too much adversity gives a leader an opportunity to address concerns. This can create an opportunity to reshape a person's memories by providing additional context. This context can include discussing how much danger a person was actually in, what actual steps were taken to manage the risk that the person may not have realized, and to provide empathy where it's appropriate. It's also important sometimes to remind people about what they have actually accomplished, and in some cases, to acknowledge that what they have done was risky or difficult, and that's part of the adventure. Of course, debriefing is also an opportunity for a leader to reflect on what they could do differently to get an even better outcome if they were to do that again. Learning from our experiences is how we become better. This is something that Will has touched on multiple times now. The last point, Jordy, is that involving people in the decision-making process is an important step, as Will touched on. Anytime there's going to be an elevated level of risk or there's a new situation that people have not encountered, the leader should probably consider involving their group in the decision-making process.
Our many thanks again to Will for being on the show. He always offers a valuable perspective. If you haven't already done so, we encourage you to check out his other episodes. As always, we remind you to make sure you follow the show, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your social network. We have posted an easily shareable link into the show notes. Thanks very much for listening.